Okay, I was, because I'm retired and get up very late, I was lying in bed the other day listening to Women's Hour on not last Monday. And there was, my ears pricked up because they said there's going to be this item from the Harris Academy. Lord Harris of Carpet fame owns all the schools in Southwark now. Anyhow, the children from the Harris Academy in Peckham are going to do an item for Women's Hour. Oh, that's really interesting. But unfortunately it was completely horrible because it was all about how they have this faculty of hair and beauty, which is part of the vocational education in this Harris Academy. And to facilitate this, they have their own salon for hair and beauty, where people from their relations and friends can go and have their hair done. And what was appalling about it, well, there were several things, but one was that there was no critique by the interviewer on this very gender-specific training that was going on in this academy. And presumably it's a mixture of boys and girls in this school, but the boys presumably do car mechanics, but the girls certainly don't. The girls do hair and beauty. And why, no questioning either why at the age of 15 or 16 it's possible for somebody to know what they want to do and train for it and then go and do it, from that young age. Now it's true that today's workforce in Britain, for most people and particularly for young people, is very precarious. There's all these short-term contracts, etc., minimum wages. Even for people graduating from university, you have to do an internship before you can get a job. So for all sections of young people, I think the precariousness of work is something they have to face. And also, a recent UNICEF report pointed out, based on information from 2009 to 10, that the UK is 16th out of 29th of the richest countries in the world for children's well-being. And for those between 15 and 19, the NEETs, not in education, employment or training, we are 27th out of 29, or no, it must be slightly more than that, but it's only worse in Romania, Spain, Ireland and Italy. So this situation is, very difficult, I think, for young people. So for young women from this Harris Academy, especially those leaving with NVQs or GCSEs, a poorly paid job in the segregated labour market is all that this school actually aspires for them. Now, people don't know Peckham, but you do, most people. It used to be very Afro-Caribbean, but it's now mostly Nigerian. It's a very big Nigerian community in the centre of Peckham, so a lot of these children are from that background. And this aspiration for the children, these girls, to be hairdressers or beauticians is clearly linked to the sexism in our society. From shops with, I don't know whether anybody goes and buys toys for their children anymore, or their grandchildren or whatever, but if you go the division of, gender division of toys is appalling. I get this pink section, which is all for girls, and then there's all these kind of mechanical things for boys, and it's completely kind of separate. Whereas in the 60s, it wasn't like that. Toys were sort of all mixed up together, as far as I remember. So there's all of that, and there's the whole construction of that comes across in adverts, like you were talking about, on hoardings and on the web. Women's beauty and slimness, etc., is everywhere. One of the girls they interviewed, it was an interesting idea in that the girls themselves did the interviewing and presented it on the radio, so it had a good idea behind it. One of those interviewed by other girls at the academy spoke of having known since she was 11 that she wanted to work in a hair and beauty salon. She said, "I like doing my own hair, colouring it, and here I can learn how to straighten hair. I want to do NVQ level 2 and get a job in a salon and become a junior stylist." And this just struck me as it's just an appalling lack of aspiration to other kind of opportunities. And the head of vocational education there, also the hairdressing teacher, spoke about the students' passion and desire and the possibility of earning good money. And he didn't need to add, such work is compatible with the role that they're going to play when they grow up as wife, mother, a primary caregiver, to be fitted in, so work to be fitted in between taking the children to school, getting them back, doing the shopping, etc. So while it's true that the vast bulk of women's work in the UK and elsewhere has always been tied to our primary role as caregivers, so becoming a teacher or a nurse or a cleaner or whatever. And that also women have been used as a reserve army of labour, as well as young people, so you're in and out of the workforce depending on the needs of capital. And today's precarious kind of work situation applies to young men and women. But it is gendered as to what each of them thinks they might do. And this leads me on to the family. And it's true that only a minority of people live today in a classical nuclear family in Britain. It's about 25%, I think, or something, like a wife, a husband and 2 kids kind of stuff, or even 1 kid, but that's a minority. So you have single parents, unmarried couples with or without children, extended families, particularly amongst immigrant families in Britain. But even so, and despite the fact that it's been adopted as a way of living by the lesbian and gay community, the nuclear family remains the basic unit of society and the site of oppression of women and children. And at work, while women and men are both exploited, only women are also oppressed, so you have a double oppression in a sense of work and the family for women. And in today's situation of austerity cuts, nearly 3/4 are falling on women. And alongside that is going an ideological attack. So there's this whole construction of the deserving and undeserving poor. Some people have deserved to be helped, others certainly don't. So the debate is shifted away from a discussion about how this structural deficit, how we arrived at it, and failures of financial services, down to the individual level, and especially the failures of the family, read mother. It's actually down to that level. So women are described as failing, needing parenting classes in order to know how to parent, living in a dependency culture, recreating this dependency culture, failing to cope. So there's a big attack, actually, an ideological attack on women in this situation. Now, the family has always been used by capitalist society to do a number of things. Obviously, as we talked about in the first session, to reproduce the future workforce and to service the existing workforce on the cheap, to clean, to cook, to care for the children and the rest of the family. Secondly, it's also been used to reproduce ideology, the dominant ideology, so that the children learn to grow up to work hard, hopefully to be heterosexual, etc. And for the rich, and for those who have a big inheritance, to ensure that the man's children are his children and not somebody else's. And with DNA testing, this can be proven nowadays. Now, Engels argued, and I think he was right to argue, that paid work outside the home was a prerequisite for women's liberation, that it would be impossible to liberate women unless they became part of the productive workforce. But what he didn't recognise, and it probably wasn't very clear then, but it's much clearer now, is that women are employed in a segregated workforce, labour market. Quite a narrow one, in fact. It's not, I mean, obviously some women become CEOs of big companies, but in general, women work in a segregated labour market and are paid less than men, even when they do very similar jobs. There's still a gap between what men earn and what women earn. And while it's true, as Engels argued, that paid work outside the home allows the woman a kind of social life with the people she works with, unconnected to the family, it's kind of outside of the family, allows her to possibly join a trade union depending on the work she's doing. It's also true, I think, that in today's conditions and the precarious state of the labour market and the work for people, the kind of work available for most working class women is very limited. It's probably extremely boring and also very exhausting. It's a sort of, combination of really nasty experiences. So the left, certainly the left that I've come from, has always argued that there'll be no socialism without women's liberation. but also no women's liberation without socialism, that the two are interconnected. Why is this? Because it has been possible for reforms to be won under capitalism. It's not that nothing has changed, quite a lot has changed. Like, for example, in 1870, under the Married Women's Property Act, women were given the right to their inheritance and their earnings, which they hadn't had before. And then in 1886, the Custody of Infants Act meant that widowed women were given rights over their children, which previously had been the responsibility of a male guardian after the husband's death. But these, and there are a number of other reforms, but most of them were fought for and won for, in a sense, bourgeois women, well-off women, because you had to go to court to get it enacted, and ordinary working class women couldn't possibly have afforded to do that. In the 20th century, we saw eventually the culmination of a very long battle in Britain for the right to vote for women, which had lasted from 1860 until 1918, on and off, grew and then went back and grew again. And then by 1928, the 1918 Act gave women over 30 the vote. But then after 1928, I think it was over 21. Yeah. And then more recently, and particularly in relation to the demands of the women's liberation movement, the 67 Abortion Act, the 73 Equal Pay Act, and the Sex Discrimination Acts of 75 and 86. But I think the point is, and the reason why we argue that there's no women's liberation without socialism, is that these reforms are not always achieved, like there isn't equal pay in Britain between men and women, but also these reforms can be taken away. So they're only reforms, and if you, in times of difficulty, the capitalist class will just remove them. So that, for example, they have right through since the 67 Act, a whole series of attempts to reduce the time limits for abortions, which continue. They choose their time. I mean, they obviously don't feel at the present moment because there's some people in the Tory party arguing that it should be only 9 weeks or something. They don't feel at this time it's a very good idea to go to change it to that extent, but they could do. So what capitalism does is to make reforms when pushed hard enough, and none of these reforms were achieved without people really fighting for them. When they give way under those situations, but either undermine them or avoid carrying them out properly. So that there was a whole argument, for example, because of the segregated labour market, women had to fight for equal pay for work of equal value because they didn't do the same work as men. So they had to go through another fight to say that actually, it's the same kind of work as that, and therefore we should be given. But as I said, that's still not been achieved. And in this present situation of austerity, the fight for universal benefits is being eroded and cut and broken. So, for example, the child benefit, which was a universal benefit for women, given to women, exactly, very importantly, not going through the man's bank account, is now being eroded. So capitalism cannot give women or other oppressed groups equality, partly because it survives itself by dividing people off from each other. It doesn't actually want equality, because that would mean people will see the ability of everybody to fight together. They want to divide people, either by race or gender or whatever else. But I think it's also true that, and I'm sure people understand that, that even after we achieve socialism, it won't inevitably lead to women's liberation. It will have to be fought for. This is what Kollontai and others found in the Russian Revolution. And those that say patronisingly, it's all right, just wait until the revolution, which you referred to, are wrong. It's important to organise now to try and achieve reforms and defend the reforms that we've won, but also after a revolution, after the achievement of socialism. And thinking about, one talks about a revolution and then socialism, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a long transition. These things go through a series of stages, and women are going to have to stay organised, fighting for their rights in order to achieve their liberation. And Trotsky, just to end, recognised this by saying, in order to change the conditions of life, we must learn to see them through the woman's eyes.
Just as he did.
Sorry?
Just as he did.
Yes.
Probably not.